you call the roll?
Yes. Gibson,
Yes.
Jackson,
Yes.
Parker,
Yes.
Smelker,
Yeah.
Geiger,
Yes.
Connor.
Yes. Motion is approved.
Madam Chair, I move for the adoption of Resolution 20-04, resolution of intent to apply for state and federal operating and capital assistance for the 2021 fiscal year and appoint William Voigt as Transportation Coordinator, authorized to provide such information as deemed necessary by the State Transportation Commission or Department for its administration of Act 51, and sign and execute all agreements and documents.
Second.
Motion by Geiger, seconded by Smelker for the adoption of Resolution 20-04, resolution of intent to apply for state and federal operating and, capital assistance for the 2021 fiscal year and appoint William Vogt as the Transportation Coordinator, authorized to provide such information as deemed necessary by State Transportation Commission or Department for its administration of Act 51, and sign and execute all agreements and documents. Is there any comment, any discussion? Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Yes. Jackson,
Yes.
Parker,
Yes.
Smelker,
Yes.
Geiger,
Yes.
Gibson,
Yes.
Connor.
Yes, the item is approved.
Madam Chair, I move for the approval of the attached letter of consent for Bethany Christian Services to resettled unaccompanied refugee minors with licensed foster families in Berry County and to authorize the chairperson to sign it.
Second.
I have a motion by Geiger, seconded by Parker, for the approval of the attached letter of consent for Bethany Christian Services to resettle unaccompanied refugee minors with licensed foster families in Berry County and to authorize the chairperson to sign it. Is there any discussion?
I think we should, go ahead.
Jane, would you like to come up to the podium at this time?
I would like to know if, the one county that did put some restrictions on the resolution, are they receiving refugees or are they not?
Who made that comment during public comment?
I did. They're going to receive 25. Unfortunately, when I was putting that together last night, it was 9 o'clock our time, so I suspected the county offices in North Dakota were closed. I saw nothing to indicate that that was not going to work. Having said that, I've seen nothing to indicate that it would work, and that's one of the. We have until the 21st.
Yes, and I can.
Is that the end of business on the 21st?
They're submitting on the 21st the funding request, so I'm not positive, but I can address the issue of the number. So we've been instructed the unconditional letter. The conditions we need to be sure not to have any discriminatory conditions in terms of race, ethnicity, gender, those types of things. But we think there's another county that is also putting a number in their consent letter, so they're doing a general consent letter. We're concerned about the unaccompanied refugee minor condition. We don't know if that will be accepted by the State Department. But we haven't heard any feedback that says they wouldn't accept a limit in number, because that's not discriminatory against a person and their who they are, if that makes sense. So we do have another county in Michigan that's considering a number to put on in terms of a limit.
Can you expound on the 1-year approval for the county? I got the impression from Larry that doesn't count for some reason.
So yes, I can clarify. So in the executive order itself, it does not specify a 1-year renewal of this. However, the State Department has issued a notice of funding opportunities for all the resettlement agencies, and those applications require consent letters, current year's consent letters, and those are submitted yearly. So it's the State Department that issued the executive order, State Department that takes these applications. So by way of connection, in order to actually have the funding to do resettlement in an area, we have to have the consent, and it's required yearly, annually.
So if a county withholds the consent, nothing will, there's no refugee, unaccompanied refugees that can come in?
New arrivals,
New
yes, no
arrivals.
new arrivals for that year.
Okay, all right. And what, if a refugee finds relatives that they couldn't find before, are they allowed to be brought in too?
There's a whole extensive process about any family members that might be reunified, and they have to go through the same vetting process. It's not that they can just simply ask their families to come. It's really a large, long process. So we don't anticipate many coming in. The number total for the country is 18,000, and so we do try to bring the families who are already vetted and planning to come. We try to have, the State Department even tries to place them close to other family members where they have community and people to support them. But it's a whole long immigration process to try to bring family members. If they're already refugees, if they already are in the process of coming to the U.S., if they make it through the whole 1.5 to 2 year process to be vetting process to get here, potentially they could come. However, we aren't set up to do any family resettlement in Berry County. So there isn't any intention to do family and adult resettlement in Berry County. Right now, we have one licensed family for unaccompanied refugee minors. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. It goes along with what I was thinking, that yearly basis that you have a decision to make.
Yeah.
All right.
I have a question, just a second, as long as we're talking about that letter. So if this letter passes and we sign it, even though the the person applying for the grant, can they use our letter over and over again each year, or do they have to have a new letter each year?
A new letter. It has to be dated. So I guess you have the choice of either putting just the date of the letter will indicate that year, or you could put in fiscal year 2020. Either way, it has to indicate a year, and it's only good for that year.
It's only good for that year, okay. Any other commissioners have any questions?
Yeah.
David?
Could you go over the vetting process again? Because there were, based on our conversation last week, I know that there is a little disdain from the UN and some of their policies, but when you look at it on a local basis, when our conversation last week, it seems like the UN may start the process, but there are several layers of vetting that go through. So this isn't done by the UN. This is done here in the United States. It's done. Can you just go through that quickly?
Yes, thank you. And I appreciate the concern and the comments that people made about that. So the UN, the only involvement the UN has is the initial determination if someone is a refugee. If they've fled their country of origin due to war and persecution, they can go to a UN site, and then they do an interview, they check, they register as a refugee. That doesn't mean they can come to the United States or any other country. So it takes a long process then for the United States to decide which of those potentially could be referred to resettle in the U.S. And that is actually a Department of State program. So the Refugee Admissions Program began in 1980. We received some refugees before that, but the current program, how it's set up, started in 1980, and the State Department determines the entire vetting process. And I can't keep track of all the security screenings, but like a gentleman shared earlier about the 14 steps, it's a very extensive process. They go through interviews, health screenings, and some of the security agencies they pass through are the National Counterterrorism Center, Terrorism Screening Center, Department of Homeland Security, Customs and Border Patrol, Interpol, the Drug Enforcement Agency, Health and Human Services, the Federal Bureau of Investigations, the Department of Defense, and other interagency checks. So it is the most extensive vetting process of anyone who enters the United States. Whether you're here as a business person, a tourist, a student, refugees have to go through more screening than anyone that comes here as a visitor. So
All done here in the United States.
that is done before they enter. Before they enter, and the United States Customs and Immigration Services actually go to the sites, the refugee camps, the countries, and they do interviews. They do all the health screenings before they enter. And so anyone who comes to us, it's not our choice to say this person or their choice, it's through the State Department. This is a federally funded, federally regulated program. And all the screening is done through the U.S. government. In fact, in the last 3 years, the current administration has increased these security screenings. So the argument is that it's even stricter than it had been in previous years with more extensive screenings, and they go even further back in their history of each person who is referred for resettlement here.
Okay, and just to review some of our conversation of last week, I know you'd mentioned earlier this morning that currently that Bethany Christian has no plans to settle refugee families in Berry County, that there's no work going on there at all.
No, currently, no, we don't have. We are not set up for that right now. The numbers are very low, the 18,000. How that will be, throughout the whole country means that probably what we normally see in Michigan, the numbers will be much lower than historically we had seen. And so primarily, any families who come will have family already here, potentially in Grand Rapids or potentially in Kalamazoo. Last year in Kalamazoo County, we only resettled in terms of families, 3 families with a total of 13 people. And we are potentially looking at less than that. We're not sure. So we're not set up actually to do family resettlement in Berry County, and we would have to go through the state refugee coordinator to make sure we get everything set up to do adult family resettlement. So there's no plans for that.
And also, you have to be a licensed foster care family,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have to have more extensive training to handle unaccompanied refugee minors
Yep.
as well, and that's I think you said a 6-month or a year-long process just for that training?
Yep, so licensed foster families, they go through all the licensing that a domestic foster care family would, with additional screenings and additional training because of the nature of the refugees' children coming in. And at minimum, at 6 months, we're seeing it take up to 10 months. So even if there was another family in Berry County who wanted to be licensed, it would take close to a year to get them in place.
And at this point, there is one family in the entirety of Berry County
Mm-hmm.
who is licensed to take on a refugee minor, and they want to take on one child?
Yep, right now, that's their intention, is to take in one child. There's one family with one child that they would like to take into their home.
Okay, so that's really the entire
Yes.
program
Yes.
for 2020.
Yep.
And we'll be back here at some point in 2021 looking at this again if there's an additional opportunity for.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
Okay, I think that answers my questions. I appreciate all of the input from the community today, because it's good to see people participate in government with opinions and research and ideas, so that helps us as well, so thank you. Thank you, Jim.
Just read on it.
Thank you.
Beg your pardon?
John has a question.
Okay,
Yes.
the sheriff's got his hand raised. We'll,
Yes.
Reference to what you just asked, what was his name that was here last week that was taking on the 14-year-old girl?
It's the Nguyen family. Yeah, Kim and Tang.
He's already contacted me twice, because my concern is the language barrier and making sure the school is prepared and everything like that. He's been awesome about that. They're looking at a 14-year-old girl right now in the Delton area.
okay. Thank you. John?
Now, the resolution we're talking about is this letter. Am I reading the right one here?
The one that's attached to the agenda item.
Yeah. And it says in here that it allows Bethany Christian Services, your service. Is there any other entities that can do this now other than your service?
In the state, Samaritas works also with refugee resettlement, and Catholic Charities, some of the dioceses around the state. Currently, I don't know of any working in Berry County,
But
any
this
other
one
agencies.
specifically mentions your name. Would they have to come get a letter of consent?
So this is where we haven't had a letter before, say, Bethany Christian Services specifically. The State Department they're not looking at doing this for Bethany Christian Services. They're looking at doing it for the county and for, so I'm not sure how that would be received.
Can I
Okay,
ask
go
a
ahead.
question on John's?
On my behalf.
I thought you
On-
had more questions when you wanted me to.
On John's point, isn't it primarily a regionalized system where Bethany takes Kent County areas and the Catholic Diocese takes other areas of Michigan?
Yeah. Yes, we have contracts through the state for different areas. Sometimes, for example, family resettlement. Both Samaritas and Bethany do family resettlement in Kent County. However, with unaccompanied refugee minors, right now, Samaritas does that in the Lansing area, but they don't do that in Kalamazoo. Bethany does that in Kalamazoo. So we do work with the state and with all the agencies to, yes, cover different areas.
So it's a region.
So just a second, then, to piggyback on that. So another agency just couldn't place somebody here in Berry County because they're not contracted for the county? Is it? Just
Right
want to make
now,
sure.
no. Right now,
Okay.
there is no other agency working in Berry County that I'm aware of.
And if they wanted to work in Berry County, who would they go through?
It would go through Ben Kavanaugh, the state refugee coordinator.
And do they normally then contact the county?
Well, this is the first time we've had to get county consent.
Okay.
Right, but we do work very, very closely with the local governments. So the places where we've established our refugee work, we work with the public schools, Health and Human Services, the law enforcement in that area. So we're very connected. It takes time to bring a family into an area, so we do a lot of work prior to their arrival. So they would have to, yes, do some work. And with this consent, I'm sure that there would be something that they would be required to do.
John, you had some more questions?
That, pretty well done on that, and,
Discussing
Set a
the
limit on
letter and before we do anything?
what's that?
And discussing the wording of the letter before we do anything?
I see it's in there where just to allow Bethany, so that's fine, and I think there should be a date in there. I see that it was drawn up on January 14th, but I think it should state in there that this is for the fiscal year 2020.
I think there's no problem with that. I would ask maybe some consideration about a general letter. I know we've received some communication from Ben Kavanaugh. He works directly with the State Department, and our instructions have been that they are accepting letters of general consent without any conditions in terms of who the persons are. So we were discussing a little bit about having a general letter that doesn't specify unaccompanied refugee minors. And I don't know if that was up for conversation or if you would be comfortable with a number versus unaccompanied refugee minors.
Does anybody else have any other questions
I
first?
do right now.
Okay.
What do you
Besides
mean-
the
What do you
letter?
mean by that? That maybe Bethany shouldn't be in there?
Both Bethany and unaccompanied refugee minors. At least the template we were,
Should be.
it should not. We were given a template that did not
Because
specify.
Lutheran Social Services might want to do the same thing too, right?
The State Department, the State Department is not asking for letters that are agency-specific.
Okay.
They're asking for county consent for the refugee admissions program to operate in that county.
Not saying unaccompanied?
They
They just want to
General
allow.
consent.
General consent.
That is what the other counties, most of the other counties that we've worked with have given the general consent letter, though there is one other county that is considering a number, like that was suggested before.
So read then, as chairperson of the Berry County Board of Commissioners, I consent to allow resettling of unaccompanied, or resettling of refugee
refugees.
minors with licensed foster families in Berry County? Is that what you're saying?
That-
It should
the-
be general like that?
I think the original letter, I don't know if we have the original letter, you have that,
They're
Michael?
included in the packet at the very end of
Oh,
that
all right.
particular topic
Oh, there's the,
is the consent letter that
you have that in your
To
packet?
Pompeo?
I'll read it for the audience. This letter is in reference to Executive Order 13888 on enhancing state and local involvement in refugee resettlement. As Chair of Berry County, I consent to initial refugee resettlement in Berry County. I understand my written consent will be publicly released by the Department of State. That's the end of the letter. So it just is, I consent to initial refugee resettlement. There is no caveats, there's no limitations in that letter, and that's what they would like. But the one that was crafted for us was the one that has, I consent to allow Bethany Christian Services to resettle unaccompanied refugee minors with licensed foster families in Berry County. I understand my written consent will be publicly released by the Department of State.
I think that makes sense from the standpoint that otherwise what John was talking about, it only allows Bethany to do that. And
What makes sense to you? Which letter?
the second one, the Pompeo one.
The original one.
They're both to Pompeo.
Okay, yeah, all right, the original one that you just read,
The first one with no caveats.
yes.
Just we allow refugees to settle.
Yeah, I don't think it affects anything else, except the fact that Bethany is taken out of the equation, which allows anybody else, I guess, that we'd want, if possibly, but it doesn't take away from the fact that we still have to have a letter of consent each year to be able to even do any of them.
But for all practical purposes, Bethany is going to be the sponsoring organization based on the setup that the state of Michigan has. Their process that has been in place long before 2020 in resettling refugees has been to go through this organization, all the vetting, and place them in Berry County through a sponsor organization. So really, no matter what letter we send, it's going to be the process as usual, which is to go through an organization and place refugees through those
Doesn't have
groups.
to necessarily say Bethany on it.
It doesn't.
No. And I think that's probably a good thing for at this point, because what we're wanting is, if they may turn it down because Bethany's in there, that's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to get that refugee.
If we sent the second letter, the original letter, it would be the same process that has been in place before 2020, which the state of Michigan can accept refugees and place them in Berry County. It's only now that we have a say in it. So really, by sending the original letter, we're just continuing the current practice. And that practice has not brought really a whole lot of refugees to Berry County.
But she is recommending to us to go with the first letter, right? That doesn't have that specifics in it.
Yes, it does not say Bethany, because,
Yeah.
I mean, we don't work directly with the State Department. It's a national agency, and then
But she's thinking that it'll go through more easy for approval.
Yeah, I'm not sure
Without
we're arguing.
Bethany.
We might be on the same side of this and not realize it.
All right.
yeah, I think
I
so.
think you guys are on the same side of it.
Yeah.
I have a comment
Okay,
too.
John.
You send an open-ended letter to the government, and it's gonna come back and bite you.
You can always send a second one.
Would you prefer, I mean, if you want, I think that we've seen counties open to a number. I'm just worried about saying Bethany when the State Department is not thinking about Bethany. They're thinking about the county and about just the general admissions program. So if there's we're only looking at placing one, potentially two children, if, let's say, that placement doesn't work and there's another child, but that could be an option too, a general consent letter with a number that you're comfortable with.
Why don't we consider two?
A number?
Two.
I have as long as we're talking about placement, I want to go back to the question, You already know who's coming, is that right? Or do you
We
not
can't-
know?
we-
Because
we-
people are saying there's somebody coming from the Congo, that,
We cannot,
a 14-year-old girl in Dalton.
So I know there was something shared last week. We actually should not be giving any identifiable information about the youth who could potentially be coming. We don't know for sure until a placement is actually placed. We get referrals. In terms of the countries, I think maybe somebody referenced the Congo because we were talking about the state of Michigan. And right now, 70% of refugees who come into the entire state of Michigan are from the Congo, Democratic Republic of the Congo, and the majority of those are families in Grand Rapids, some in Kalamazoo and other areas. However, we don't know the origin or the country, the exact timing yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't want you to give out any information you're not supposed to. No, absolutely not. But it was my understanding that until it happens, you don't know who's coming.
We get referrals that the family can look at and make sure that it's a good fit. They can say yes, and then we wait for the State Department to continue their process for placement.
And without divulging anything, do you already have a referral?
We've had several referrals for this family, and all until have fallen through.
Okay.
Where they haven't been able to travel or something's come up, they haven't been placed. But we do have referrals for the family.
All right. Who?
Is there any other families in training to be able to take in these children?
No, we don't have any others who are in the licensing process right now.
How long does it take to get the training to?
At minimum 6 months, we're seeing 8 to 10 months, even up to a year.
And you had asked for 2 children for the year 2020?
We would ask, what number? I mean, 2 seems very low. If we have another county who is considering 5, to put that number just in case. What would happen would be if one child is placed and then it was not a good match and they go to a different family, that the family would be able to.
The family in Berry County is approved for 2 children, right?
I believe so, yes, they're licensed for 2
So
children.
maybe that's what we ought to allow then.
Yeah, but if they don't turn out, then you're talking 3. And if they don't work out, 4. Am I right there?
That's what if that placement doesn't work out, sometimes,
Raise it just a little bit.
similar
more.
to domestic
Places
foster
done
care.
5.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it would be one, and then 2, and if they weren't able to stay with that family, then they might consider, well, we can't send any more.
Then if there was a limit, we wouldn't be able to place after that. That's the concern, if you just place that single number.
Ben?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So would it be preferable to have a unspecific letter of consent with a cap versus a specific letter with no cap?
From what I understand from our refugee state coordinator, yes.
Okay.
That would be preferable.
And another county has explored doing 5.
Yes.
Do you think that
Between
would,
5 and 10 is what the number, and we'll find out this week what they've decided.
do you think that would be an appropriate number for Berry County?
I do, yes. Yeah.
John?
I'm game for that, and especially if she wants Bethany Christian out of there. We could take that out, put a cap on it, and a fiscal year date.
Is that a motion?
Yes,
Second.
now we've done.
The only problem
More
with putting
discussion.
a physical year is the federal government and the county government are on 2 different cycles. I think you mean calendar year.
Okay, calendar year, I'll go with that.
There was a hand raised over here in the audience that I don't want to ignore. Was it Larry or?
That was me, and I think he's, no offense intended, kick that stone to death. Conversation, so I'm satisfied now.
You're good?
Yeah, I did contact, Eaton County passed a resolution back on 12/18 of 19, and I just referenced their resolution, and it's one of the, where is it, about those types of resolutions, but then they did not specify a service or
Right,
a quantity, but I did talk to a couple of my commissioner contacts, and their intent is that it's going to be the same service regulations. So in other words, they're saying that we treated it like a continuing resolution because they've had something like this in the past.
I'm going to reach out to Terry Berry. She said she had something more that
Do you want me to step?
just.
Stay right there.
Okay,
Stay right
okay,
there. They might have
okay.
questions
But
for you.
we, yeah,
I just want to say that listening to this conversation has restored my faith in our county government. I think that the paper may have misrepresented a little bit about what happened last week. And I feel like you are humanitarians and that you do care about the people of the world and not just people who happen to look like us. Thank you.
thank you. Any other questions? Not from the board, not from the floor. Okay, so we're going to, I'm going to make some corrections here on this letter, which says, this letter, the first paragraph is pretty good. I mean, as chairperson of the Berry County Board of Commissioners, I consent to resettle, and are we leaving in the unaccompanied refugee minors?
If we could go back to the very template
Yeah.
sample letter where it says original resettlement of refugees. I think that's how the wording.
It says, I
Initial-
consent to initial refugee resettlement.
Yep. If that is ideal. That's what we've been given as a sample letter that the State Department would accept.
Commissioners, because there was some concern that it would only be minors. That's, I'm just asking before we, to make sure we've crafted the right letter.
Yeah, we're going back to the original drafts that came
That
from
would
the
allow
state.
adults and anybody. Is that
Mhm.
right? I mean, if that's what you're
Yeah,
wanting.
It's not my favorite, but I will say yes, if we get what I asked for.
Okay, so we're going back to the first one then. So as, I consent to initial refugee resettlement in Berry County. And then we want to say for 5 to 10 refugees, right there. I
How
consent
did
to
the
initial
other county
refugee
word it?
resettlement in Berry County for.
We haven't heard the final decision, but it was somewhere between 5 and 10 that they were considering. And they also just have one family who's licensed in their county.
5, too.
The recommendation was 5, I would just go with the solid number.
So I consent to initial refugee resettlement in Berry County. Where's the 5 going? I consent to 5 initial refugee resettlement,
up to 5.
up to 5.
Or is it 5 or less?
Up to 5, I think it would have the same.
And that would be resettle. I consent to up to 5 initial refugee resettlements in Berry County. I understand my written consent will be publicly released by the Department of State. But we want to put for the calendar year of 2020?
Yeah, yeah.
Are they working, I think they're working on a fiscal year,
Not a calendar?
not a calendar year.
Fiscal year.
Fiscal year, it's fiscal year 20
October
from
1?
October 1 to October.
Starts in July.
Oh, it starts in July?
Oh, so we've got that,
Federal government's different than the state government.
so.
You could just say, is it
It's-
federal?
I know we're gonna redo this next December anyways, right?
Right, yeah, so if you want to say, yeah, the calendar year 20, I'm sure would be,
Yeah, that's really the only authority we have to say.
okay.
Yes,
You have some.
thank you.
I was just curious,
Yes.
if we went from minors to adults, okay, with this letter you're talking about right now. If we're bringing adults in, obviously they don't need to have foster care at somebody's home, so they just get to come in, period, right?
So, no, they have to come through an agency and through the
Right.
entire vetting process. We
They
actually,
don't just stay in a foster home or with somebody
no,
else.
we
They have to
usually-
have a sponsor, don't they?
They sponsor, they get sponsored through our agency and through a church. Usually it's a church co-sponsor who helps them get set up and helps them initially. Now, we're not actually, I know it sounds like we're changing from minors to adults.
Well, yeah, you
But
are.
we are
are.
trying to comply with the federal government because they may not even allow the conditioned letter. But we are not intending, we do not do any family adult resettlement in Berry County.
Not yet. but open it up.
We have no intention, and it's not that simple to just do that. We've got a whole infrastructure to set up if we want to bring a family in. It's a lot of work, and we don't have people here to do that. We don't have any intention to do that right now. And the numbers are very, very low this year. We don't know how many we're even going to be able to resettle.
However, can
Wait
I-
a second, let the floor get there, and then we'll make the final.
Because like I said, I'm not against bringing in kids, I'm all for bringing in kids, just as long as done the correct way, okay?
All right, thank you.
Now when we start saying okay for adults too, now that raises a whole
Afraid
nother
it
issue.
won't pass.
Okay, thank you. Joel?
I would like also possibly put on the record that we take into consideration my recommendation last week, and that is we don't make this 2 refugees, we make it 102 refugees, but we don't do it through the United Nations. There are 70.8 million refugees in the world. 18,000 doesn't make a dent at that.
I can address that a little bit.
Thank you. Is that it? Okay, thank you. All right.
There are, in this 18,000 that the Trump administration has determined as our numbers, not many are actually through the UNHCR right now. Many of them could be folks who have helped the U.S. government in some way. Those who are religiously persecuted, there's a high number of those, and also those who've been recommended by a U.S. embassy overseas. So the number that are actually coming through the UN, the vetting process will be the same through the State Department. That doesn't change. But the number that are actually coming through the UN are lower than they had been before. So we do work with the embassies overseas as well as other agencies.
Because I remember last week you said, or I'm not sure if you said it or the coordinator that was with you, that all refugees had to be registered through the United Nations.
They're registered, that's their determination internationally, but those 18,000, the current administration has also given it's a new process that through a U.S. embassy, so if a U.S. embassy overseas determines that someone, so it'd be fully in the U.S. Process, and not, there may be some. It's a new, there's 5,000 that they've recommended potentially to come through a U.S. embassy rather than through the UN. But we have always resettled those who've come through the UN.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, Dan.
You said that Bethany aren't interested in adults, but yet we're taking you off this. So it isn't necessarily Bethany that could be bringing something through here.
So this actually isn't our choice. We are trying to comply the best we can with the State Department. Our concern is that for us to continue doing the work that we want to do in terms of bringing a child into a loving, safe home is that we need to comply with the executive order and the State Department. So we've been consulting with the State Department, and they have given guidelines that said no conditional language, and they are not working directly with Bethany. They're not saying that, they're just saying that they have a refugee admissions program, and they want counties to give consent to the refugee admissions program that is established by the State Department. So we're just trying to make sure the language is acceptable. We don't intend to do anything differently than what I've said, what we're planning to do. We just want to make sure the language of the letter is acceptable to the State Department in order to comply with their requirements.
So you think minor in there would be something that they'll reject?
We've been told we don't know if they will accept it. They may not because of the unconditional language that they said they prefer. They prefer unconditional language in the letter. Those were the guidelines that we got from the State Department. But other counties have given a limit of a number. So that's why when somebody brought that up in
That
public
have
comment.
been approved or not?
That we haven't heard any we haven't heard any feedback that they might not be approved.
So we could do the same thing with minor too then, and see if they haven't been approved there too.
It sounds like she thinks that's a higher degree of risk.
I don't know. That, I don't know if she really knows.
Because I think we've got some communication from the state coordinator, Ben Kavanaugh, who works directly with the State Department, and his guidance through all of this has been no conditions that relate to who the person is in terms of anything that could be seen as discriminatory. A number isn't discriminatory against a person.
The age is,
Yes.
I'm sorry, what did you say, John?
and an age is discriminatory.
So that's what we're just concerned about, the language being.
There is a email here from Mr. Kavanaugh. In particular, I just wanted to reinforce what Jane shared, that the federal government's expectation, that's their expectation, is that if consent is provided, there are no exceptions or conditions. While we are grateful and welcome your willingness to ensure continued foster care for the unaccompanied minors, youth, we want to ensure the consent provided does establish that. Also, I want to assure you that we as state have no intentions of branching into adult and family resettlement in Berry County. Additionally, it would also be my expectation that our resettlement agencies consult with me and meet with public officials, schools, and health departments prior to consideration of a resettlement plan in a new area. And that was one of my questions last week, is how have they reached out to Berry County to get feedback from the public? And we have not had any response to how that occurred.
Well, because we're not doing an adult and family resettlement, we've had no need to reach out to who we normally would reach out to when we're resettling adults. You'll see we have monthly meetings in Kalamazoo with all our partners in the community, as well as they've got a large network in Grand Rapids. Because we haven't placed anyone here yet, with foster care, we work through the family. So through the family, through their local schools, through the health department in that area, through their pediatricians, through their church. So it generally tends to be with foster families, education and health and their religious community that we reach out to get feedback prior to placement. So even in the licensing process, there's been dialogue, and they have to have the support of the community to be licensed as a family.
Okay. So I'm going to read this paragraph again. As chair of Berry County, I consent to up to 5 initial refugee resettlement in Berry County for the calendar year 2020. I understand my written consent will be publicly released by the Department of State.
Resettlements, plural.
Thank you. Commissioners?
We have a motion?
We have a motion on the floor. Will you read the motion back, Sarah? Okay.
You have it, it's this motion right at the bottom.
Approval of the attached letter of consent for Bethany Christian Services to resettle unaccompanied refugee minors with licensed foster families in Berry County and to authorize chairperson to sign it.
That was made by John?
That was made by Ben and supported by Mr. Parker.
Okay.
We took Bethany out, though, didn't we?
Well,
Point of
but that was
order.
the motion.
Oh.
Yeah, point of order, Madam Chair. The question now before the board is adoption of the substitute, which you just
Right.
read.
Yeah.
Right. But don't we want to,
We have to vote on the substitute first, and then the main motion.
and then the main motion?
Yes.
But I don't have a motion for a corrected letter yet.
All right, if
I have only
no
have a,
objection I don't have an objection to changing my motion. If whoever seconded it doesn't have an
either.
objection, we'll substitute the
I
language
don't-
and vote on it
I
once.
don't have an objection either.
okay, that's what I'm saying. I don't have a motion to approve the
Changing
generic.
the letter.
Okay.
Yeah, so you need to ask, does anyone object to substituting the motion language?
Does anyone object to substituting the motion language?
Nope, now we vote on the
Okay. There are no, okay, so now I would like to ask for the substitute language, or not the substitute language, but the motion to approve the letter of authorization for the resettlement of initial refugee resettlements, and to approve the chair to sign the letter.
But you said there's a limit too.
Well, the language, the language of the second letter.
All right, I thought
That's-
you were reading the motion,
No,
so. all right.
no. Well, there isn't, I don't really have anything to read from, I'm just going by what we just talked
The
about.
board has consented to changing the
The
motion I
language.
made. Mm-hmm. And now we vote on the language you just read
Right,
with the original letter with the 5.
yeah, we are
Bethany out and putting a 5 in.
up, yep, that's it. And adding a calendar year.
Yep,
And if we approve this, then the letter gets signed.
And we take minors out, right?
Yeah.
Just refugees,
Okay.
all right? So let's do a roll, you called for a roll call vote?
Yes, it's on the agenda as a roll call.
Okay, oh, yes, thank you. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll?
Yes. Parker,
yes.
Smelker,
Yes.
Geiger,
Yes.
Gibson.
Yes.
Jackson,
Yes.
and Connor.
Yes. Motion is approved.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for your time and your efforts. I'm very, very grateful. Thank you.
Because of the time constraint, Michael, can we get this corrected and she can take it with her when she leaves?
Yeah, we should go.
Can you stick
I
around
can
for a
stay,
little bit?
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all very much, and thank you to the public also. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for being patient
We need
with
a
us
break.
as we get through that. So let's, moving on with the agenda so people can continue their day. Unfinished business.
Is he out in the hallway?
Oh, I'm sorry, Eric.
Tell her pink shirt.
Do we need a break before then, or should we just roll right into it?
Does anyone need a break here, commissioners?
Just go, you guys started without me last time, I don't dare leave again.
I'm sorry, I didn't see that you were there.
May I get a drink, please? Madam, can I get a drink?
We'll have a short break of, we'll be back at 10:40.
That is short.
2 minutes.